I had never been good at keeping my face from betraying me, but with her, it was impossible. She laughed softly, that gentle, knowing laugh, and I could feel heat creeping up my neck before I even realized I was blushing. Somehow, that tiny reaction seemed to amuse her endlessly. And somehow, she kept leaning closer, testing just how far she could go before I faltered again. Her name was Evelyn. She moved like someone who had spent decades learning the rhythm of rooms, knowing exactly how to command attention without needing to say a word. Her hair, streaked with hints of silver, caught the light in a way that made the ordinary corner of the cafe we sat in feel luminous. She had a grace I could never match, the kind of elegance that made you notice every subtle gesture, the tilt of her chin, the soft way her fingers traced the edge of her cup. And yet, under that calm confidence, I sensed a trace of something fragile, like she carried secrets she didn't want anyone to see. I was younger than she was by more than 2 decades. I knew it, she knew it. And yet, sitting across from her, I felt something I'd never felt before, a quiet magnetism that made me lean in without thinking, my attention tethered entirely to her. Every time her hand brushed mine, it was accidental, at least, that's what she insisted. But my skin remembered each fleeting contact, a memory sharper than any words could capture. "Are you always this tense?" she asked, tilting her head, letting her eyes linger on mine. I swallowed, fumbling with the napkin in my hands. I don't know. Maybe." Her lips quirked upward, and she laughed again, softer this time, as though she'd just revealed a secret. Her laughter filled the small space between us, and I felt my own chest tighten. She didn't need to touch me to make me notice her. The weight of her presence, the warmth in her glance, was enough. I tried to meet her eyes without flinching and failed. She noticed. I could see it in the way she leaned slightly forward, as if daring me to meet her gaze fully, to hold it without looking away. I did, for a few heartbeats too long, and when I finally blinked, my mind replayed her every expression, the slight curve of her lips, the almost imperceptible arch of her brow, the way her hand rested on the table, so close to mine. The cafe around us faded into white noise, the clatter of cups, the low hum of conversation. Nothing existed except the subtle tension that lingered in the space between us, thick enough that I could almost taste it. Every time our fingers brushed, it was electric, even when it was only a whisper of contact. "You blush easily," she said, almost teasing, almost tender. "I guess I do," I admitted, my voice quieter than intended. Her laugh came again, lilting, and she shook her head slightly. "It's endearing." "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I wanted to say something clever or meaningful, but the words dissolved before they reached me. Instead, I just watched her, memorizing the way her presence could hold a room, and yet make me feel like I was the only person in it. Then, just as the moment felt unbearably close, as though it could tip over into something neither of us was ready to name, a door at the far end of the cafe swung open. A gust of wind cut across the floor, scattering napkins, and Evelyn's gaze flicked toward it, her hand tightening around her cup. She didn't look back at me immediately, but when she did, her eyes held a question that left my stomach nodding, a silent invitation that made me realize none of this was accidental. And just like that, the world intruded, leaving the tension between us hanging like a fragile thread, pulsing, unfinished. I couldn't stop thinking about that moment in the cafe, even hours later. How her presence seemed to bend the air around her, how each laugh, each glance, made me hyper-aware of my own skin. I wondered what it was like for her, this effortless control she had, and yet, sometimes, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Evelyn had told me little about herself, but what she did reveal was enough to sketch a picture of guardedness. A divorce that left her wary of attachment. Long stretches of work that filled rooms but emptied hearts. The kind of loneliness that isn't loud, It sits quietly in a house, in a smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. I saw it in the way she sometimes lingered near the window, staring at the rain without noticing the droplets sliding down the glass, as if waiting for something she didn't know how to name. I, too, carried my own hesitations. At 22, the world seemed full of possibilities, but I'd never met anyone who made me forget the rules I'd convinced myself to follow. And yet, with her, those rules bent. Age, expectation, the inevitable whispers that might follow. None of it mattered the moment her hand brushed mine as she passed me the sugar, or when her shoulder nudged mine ever so slightly in conversation. Every contact, small as it was, felt like trespassing into something both forbidden and essential. There was a careful dance we seemed to be doing, though neither of us admitted it. She would lean in close while we talked, letting the warmth of her presence settle around me, then abruptly pull back as if testing her own restraint. I caught myself tracing the path of her hand, noticing the way her perfume lingered just long enough to make me dizzy, or how the faintest tremor in her voice carried a hidden weight. My pulse spiked at the subtlest touches, and I hated how obvious it probably was, though she didn't seem to mind, at least not entirely. I remember the other night, sitting on her sofa, discussing some trivial book she'd recommended. My elbow brushed hers. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, she let her fingers hover near mine, a whisper away from contact. Her breath stirred softly in my ear as she read a passage aloud, and I realized I was holding mine, not wanting to break the fragile tension between us. "Do you always notice everything?" she asked, eyes glinting with that knowing mixture of mischief and something I couldn't name. I swallowed. "I notice what matters." She smiled, tilting her head slightly, and that small movement sent a jolt through me, like a spark hopping between two wires just close enough to touch. That was the moment I understood we were walking on the edge of something neither of us wanted to define aloud, but both of us were drawn toward anyway. She laughed softly at some point, a sound so intimate it made me forget the rest of the world. And when our eyes met again, for a fraction longer than polite, I felt an unspoken agreement pass between us. We could linger here, in this moment, daring to explore the space between us without naming it. Her hand brushed my arm as she reached for her cup. A tiny gesture. Tiny, but it sent a pulse straight to my chest. And when she looked up, her gaze held me, steady and almost tender, and I knew, without a word, that we both wanted the same thing, even if we didn't yet dare to admit it. I had just reached for the book she'd set on the arm of the sofa when the soft ping of a notification cut through the quiet. My phone lit up, an innocuous message, but it felt like a spotlight thrown across the room. Evelyn glanced at it with me, her eyes flicking down and then back up, and for a heartbeat, the air between us shivered. "I should," she started, and then stopped, letting the words hang unfinished. I shook my head, words unnecessary. The moment had stretched too long to be interrupted. Instead, I shifted closer, careful, deliberate. She didn't pull back, and I felt the brush of her leg against mine, so close it should have been dangerous, and yet we sat like that, suspended in a fragile truce between desire and caution. Her laughter, low and soft, broke the tension briefly, and I couldn't stop myself from noticing the way her fingers moved, brushing against the fabric of her sweater, as if she were unaware of the effect. My own hands itched to reach out, to follow the line of her wrist, to see if she'd let me. "Do you ever think about boundaries?" I asked, my voice quieter than intended. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she tilted her head, just enough for her hair to graze my cheek. My pulse stuttered. She was teasing, but also testing. Her eyes, so steady, betrayed just the faintest flicker of doubt, of worry about what we were doing, or what we were daring to feel. A knock at the door startled us both. Evelyn's shoulder brushed mine as she rose, and I realized how small the space was between us, how our closeness had become unavoidable. I wanted to step back, to breathe normally, but instead, I found myself frozen, reluctant to break the tension that had become its own kind of intimacy. The knock faded into a distant sound. Whoever it was had moved on. Relief and disappointment mingled, twisting in my chest. I looked up at her, and she was watching me, lips parted, as if she had been holding her breath. I wanted to close the gap, to let our faces inch closer, to see if she would let it happen, but the rational part of me, the part terrified of crossing an invisible line, held me back. Her hand lingered near mine on the sofa arm. The simple brush, accidental or not, made my skin buzz. I wanted to take it, to let my fingers intertwine with hers, but we both knew the moment wasn't ours to claim entirely. So instead, we remained suspended, the electricity unspent but undeniable. Her eyes caught mine again, and for a single, suspended second, it was as if she were daring me to close the space, to see if she would lean in or pull away. My chest tightened, and I realized that despite the fear, despite the unspoken rules, I couldn't stop moving closer. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Yet somehow, the world had narrowed to the space between us, closer than ever, charged, impossible to ignore. The air trembled with what we were not saying, with what we both wanted but refused to admit aloud. And even as we tried to resist, I felt her warmth press against me, and I knew we were both lost in this gravity, unwilling to let go. The apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in and makes every breath feel heavier. I could hear the faint tick of the clock, a metronome counting down the moments I'd been waiting for. Evelyn was close, too close, her shoulder brushing mine as we moved through the kitchen, her presence warming the space around me in a way that made everything else fade. "I can't stop thinking about it," I blurted before I could stop myself, my voice low, almost trembling. The word surprised even me. I had rehearsed a dozen ways to say nothing, to keep the tension safe, but it was gone now. Gone with the brush of her hand on my arm, with the way her hair had caught my fingers earlier and refused to let go. She froze. The knife she was holding hovered above the cutting board, her fingers tightening slightly around it. Then, slowly, she set it down. Her eyes, Evelyn's eyes, were fixed on me, steady, unflinching, but I could see the flicker beneath them. Caution, surprise, something raw and exposed. She started, and stopped, her lips parting just enough to let a sigh escape. I reached out before I could second-guess myself, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Her skin was warm under my fingers, and she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned in, just slightly, close enough that I could feel the faintest brush of her breath on my cheek. My heart hammered, every pulse a warning and an invitation all at once. "I can't pretend I don't notice you," I admitted, my voice dropping lower, almost a whisper. "Not anymore." Her hand trembled as it rested on the counter, then slid toward mine. The air between us was electric, thick with everything we hadn't said and all we were daring to. I wanted to close the distance, to feel her lips against mine, to dissolve all the hesitation that had built up between us. Her eyes softened, a flicker of something vulnerable I had only glimpsed in passing. I don't know if I should," she whispered. Her words trembled with their own tension, a mixture of restraint and desire, and it made me ache. I leaned closer. My lips hovered near her ear as I spoke, my voice barely audible. "Maybe it doesn't matter anymore." Her breath hitched, and I could feel her leaning into me, the faint warmth of her chest brushing against mine. Every rational thought I had fought to hold onto dissolved in the closeness, in the way her gaze refused to break contact with mine. The room seemed to shrink around us. My hand hovered near hers, unsure whether to take it, to hold it, to anchor this precarious gravity that had pulled us together. The tension was unbearable, yet exquisite, every nerve alive, every heartbeat loud enough to drown out reason. And then, just as our lips were about to meet, inches apart, a sharp sound rang from the hallway, a key turning in the lock. We froze. The moment hung, fragile and electric, and I realized with a jolt that everything was on the edge now. Would we let it happen? Or would the world intrude again before we could? The key turned, and the hallway door clicked shut behind whoever had just left, or so I thought. Evelyn exhaled slowly, a subtle tremor running through her shoulders, and I felt my own chest tighten. The tension we built earlier lingered, electric and raw, but now it was tinged with something new, uncertainty. "I need to tell you something," she said abruptly, her voice low, cautious, but carrying that unmistakable weight that made me lean in without thinking. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her sweater, twisting the fabric, betraying the calm she tried to maintain. I nodded, heart hammering. "Anything." She hesitated, then finally met my eyes. "The truth is, someone might have seen us." Her words hit like a sudden gust of wind. My stomach knotted. What do you mean?" She swallowed. "When I was coming home last week, I ran into my neighbor. I think they saw me with you." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she shook her head slightly, as though trying to push down a thought too heavy to bear. I felt my own pulse spike. It wasn't just embarrassment. I was aware of her nearness, and how even in this moment of risk, I wanted to reach out, to steady her, even though I wasn't sure how. I could feel the warmth of her hand near mine, hovering like a question neither of us dared to answer aloud. "I didn't know they were there," I whispered, my voice shaking, partly from fear and partly from the proximity. I leaned a fraction closer, careful, almost desperate. Her breath brushed against my cheek, and I felt a shiver run through me. She stepped back just slightly, and I noticed the faintest quiver in her fingers as she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. The motion should have been mundane, but in the suspended air between us, it felt intimate, charged, like a promise we hadn't yet given each other. "I don't want anyone to complicate this," she said, her voice softer now, almost confessional. "I shouldn't want this either, but I do." I swallowed, torn between stepping closer and respecting the invisible barrier that society, reason, and caution had drawn around us. Yet the magnetic pull was irresistible. Every subtle movement, the brush of her shoulder against mine, the tilt of her head toward me, the way her eyes lingered, made me ache for something I didn't have the right to take. I reached out, my fingers barely grazing hers. The contact sent a tremor through both of us. The risk made everything sharper, more vivid, the warmth of her skin, the softness of her voice, the undeniable gravity pulling us together. Fear and desire tangled in my chest, inseparable, thrilling, dangerous. "I don't care if it's risky," I admitted, my lips so close to hers that she could feel my words against her mouth. "I can't stop thinking about you." Her eyes widened, and I saw a flicker of something fierce and fragile at once. She swallowed, her chest rising and falling quickly. "Then," she started, and paused, letting the words dangle. "Then maybe we don't have to." The air between us hummed with the weight of what we were about to do, or were daring to imagine. Everything had shifted. Nothing felt safe anymore. And yet, somehow, I wanted the danger. I wanted her. The apartment felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, pressing us together. I could hear the faint hum of the heater, the soft tick of the clock, but everything else, the world outside, the rules, the age gap, the whispered warnings, had vanished. It was just her and me, inches apart, suspended on the edge of something neither of us could deny. Her eyes were wide, searching mine as if trying to decide whether to trust what her heart already knew. I reached out again, slower this time, letting my fingers brush against hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let the contact linger, a silent acknowledgement of what we were both feeling. I shouldn't, she whispered, her voice trembling low, raw. I know I shouldn't. I know, I replied, voice barely more than a breath. But it doesn't matter. Not anymore. She swallowed, the motion catching her throat, and I could see the conflict flickering across her face. Desire and fear intertwined, impossible to separate. My other hand hovered near her cheek, hesitant, desperate, as if daring her to let me close the gap. The air between us was thick, almost liquid with tension, every heartbeat echoing in my ears. She leaned in slightly, her lips hovering just above mine. I felt the warmth of her breath, the subtle tremor in her shoulders, the way her hand curled almost instinctively into mine. I wanted to close the distance, to feel that fragile, dangerous connection made tangible. And yet, part of me hesitated, not because I wanted to stop, but because I knew the weight of what it meant to truly surrender. Her eyes softened, vulnerability and courage mingling in a way that made my chest ache. Do you really want this? She asked, almost afraid of her own voice. I do, I said, steady despite the tremor running through me. I want you. All of this, us, right now. Even if it's messy. Even if it's risky. She exhaled sharply, leaning closer, letting her forehead rest against mine. The warmth of her body pressed into me, subtle, intimate, but enough to dissolve the last of our hesitation. Her hand tightened around mine, a silent confession, a surrender, a promise. And then, in that heartbeat suspended between desire and fear, everything shifted. The pull that had haunted us, the tension, the longing, the risk, became a bridge instead of a barrier. We didn't need words. We didn't need permission. We only needed the gravity of each other. Her lips barely brushed mine, a whisper of contact, and it was enough to make the world around us disappear entirely. Every doubt, every hesitation, every shadow of the past fell away in the warmth of that single, fragile kiss. We pulled back just slightly, foreheads still touching, breathing mingling, and I saw it clearly in her eyes. The understanding that we were no longer just two people skirting the edges of something forbidden. We were exactly where we needed to be. And for the first time, I understood her fully, and she understood me. The afternoon sunlight slanted through the blinds, dust motes drifting lazily in the warm glow. I sat on the sofa, and she settled beside me, close enough that the space between us had vanished entirely. No hesitation, no teasing distance, just the simple, undeniable presence of each other. Her hand found mine again, fingers intertwining naturally, like they'd always belonged there. I could feel the subtle warmth of her palm, the soft pressure of her grip, and a wave of calm washed over me. No words were needed. Not now. The doubts that had loomed, the age difference, the risk, the outside world, felt distant, almost silly, compared to the quiet certainty of being here together. Evelyn leaned her head against my shoulder, the faint weight of her hair brushing my neck. I shifted slightly, adjusting to the closeness, and she let out a soft sigh that felt like a confession and a promise all at once. My arm instinctively wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she melted against me in a way that made me realize just how much she had let herself trust me. I never thought I'd feel like this again, she murmured, her voice low and intimate. I didn't think I could let someone in. You did, I said softly, my thumb brushing along the back of her hand. And I'm here. You don't have to worry anymore. Her lips pressed against the top of my head in a gentle, lingering kiss. It wasn't dramatic, and it didn't need to be. It was human, warm, and infinitely tender. I leaned down, resting my forehead against hers, letting the silence between us speak louder than any confession could. The air was thick with the memory of everything that had led us here. The stolen glances, the teasing touches, the near confessions, the risks. And yet, in this moment, everything felt natural, effortless, as if the world had been quietly shaping itself to allow us this closeness. We didn't talk for a long while. Words were unnecessary. The rhythm of our breathing, the press of her body against mine, the quiet of the apartment, it was enough. We had crossed the edge we'd been circling, and the aftermath was simpler, warmer, richer than I could have imagined. Finally, she whispered, I'm glad we took the risk. Me too, I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. It's exactly where we're supposed to be. And there we stayed, quiet but connected, hearts still racing yet calm in a way only trust and surrender can create. Fingers entwined, foreheads touching, every lingering doubt dissolved into the warmth of our presence. The sunlight shifted, casting long shadows, and for the first time, it felt like the world outside could wait. Right here, right now, we had everything we needed, each other. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?